Hello, everyone, and welcome to the start of the wonderful Cyberpunk week. Today we've got a bunch of people from Lore Party and Certain Point of View, and we're going to have a discussion about some of our thoughts on kind of what we're getting into this week and about what cyberpunk as a genre has been into for the last 40 to 50 years. And so with that, my name's Caleb. I'm from Lore Party. I also host Kestrel Tavern on Carpe Ludos, and let's go down the list and see who else we got today.
I really hope I'm here.
Well, now that you've spoken, you better introduce yourself.
Oh,
Exactly.
Okay, cool. I'm on. Oh God. I'm Jaden Parise. I'm also from Lore Party. I've done a guest spot or two on some shows for Cardi Lupos, and yeah, before the pandemic, I did stand-up comedy, but I'm not allowed to do that anymore. So, not because of the pandemic, they just don't want me back.
I was gonna say, I'll go next. My name is Lawrence Kelly. I am from Lore Party. I'm a host, producer, and I'd sometimes make really nice music you hear in the backgrounds of stuff. And before the pandemic, I pretty much did this, and now I'm still doing it. So, hey, it's gonna look great. Exactly.
Why don't we round out the Lore Party introductions and then we'll jump into CPOV.
Sure, why not? The newest guy. My name's Connor Howard, host and producer at Lore Party, newest member of the Lore Party family. It's great to be here. Been involved for about a year and a year and a half now. I'm also an amateur voice actor, and yeah, mostly I just sit around in the house, chatting with these fun people, and it's great to be here. I'm excited to talk about cyberpunk stuff. So
Fun people, where are they at?
Case, you want to go
and they're
next?
around here somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll go next. I'm Case Aiken. I'm with Certain Point of View. I'm the host for Another Pass and Men of Steel. And outside of podcasting, I just work a regular day job. So this is my release.
And I am Matt, aka Stormageddon. I also am from Certain POV. I host on the network Fun and Games. I produce side quests, and then of course I also host Screen Snark and Reignite, both video game podcasts. And then outside of that, I of course am a DJ as well and a Twitch streamer. And yeah, I'm really excited to chat cyberpunk, the genre.
Yeah, and so and I think like kind of getting into that, kind of segueing into that. So as far as like cyberpunk as a genre, I think like to be more broadly, what do we consider cyberpunk as a genre to be, to kind of like give us a definition to be working from? So like stories of cyberpunk examples that we think are more definitive, or themes we think of as key, like some obviously with genres it's a little bit more complicated what does and doesn't fit into a given genre, because not everything fits nicely into those molds. But like, what are some key things that like might suddenly make a story cyberpunk or not cyberpunk?
I mean, the simplest thing I can think of is, hi, I am man. I had normal hand. Now my hand is made of metal and can do robot things.
That's one of them, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, sort of. I mean, I kind of see cyberpunk as being like an the opposite side of the coin to like post-apocalyptic, because it's one where society held itself together, but humanity was kind of lost. It only really exists because magic, or no, not magic, because science has taken over and destroyed humanity.
And magic. It destroys
Yeah,
magic too.
It kind of becomes on
In
its own.
my
I've been
small
playing too
brain,
much
they're
D&D.
one and the same.
But where science sort of like strips away the humanity, and that kind of goes hand in hand with like keeping society together, but it's only sort of like the reanimated corpse of society.
Yeah, I think body modification is definitely a big theme of cyberpunk. Like when people replace their body parts, like flesh is replaced with technology. That's a big part of it. That's like, to me, it's just there's always that undercurrent of technology has gone wrong, and humanity is taking a backseat to progress or technology in general. That's something I've seen a lot.
See, I always look at it as like I don't know. It's like the ultimate progress of man. Like you get to that certain point where they've got like robots that are, it's like another class of people, or you have like augmented folks and whatever. But like, it's like the ultimate technological progress of man, but there's always like the huge setbacks. It's like we also bring all of the problems of man along too. So you have like dystopian future, you have like divided class systems based off of like augmented and non-augmented people, like crime, all that fun stuff.
Right,
all of the favorites, all of my favorite things: crime, technology, robots,
Crazy billionaires with their
All the
toys.
hits.
Well, yeah, that's like Jaden makes a good point. That's what I always equate to it. And is like the idea that there's also like the punk side is like anti-establishment. Like there's always a giant corporation.
Mhm.
There's always like some big company or big political party or like government related thing that like this big entity that you have to rebel against. And like it ranges depending on, like recently talking about, and we'll talk more about this later on the Fun and Games episode that's coming out this week. We talk about how like Final Fantasy VII is very cyberpunk because of the anti-Shinra and like, really focusing on Avalanche being a terrorist group, which comes out even more in the remake and like the conflict. I think that kind of conflict of like small group or man, quote unquote, versus company or, establishment is like a huge narrative through line.
Yeah. To Matt's point, just to dovetail off that, like I think that's where the punk in Cyberpunk comes in. Like we talked about this recently on Fun Games when I was a guest, and that's to my thinking, punk is all about like the concept of punk, whether it's cyberpunk, steampunk, or just hardcore punk, like we have in in real life. There's a counterculture and there's like a pushback against a sort of establishment. To Matt's point, so I think that's core to what cyberpunk is. And like Lawrence mentioned, there's like a dichotomy of wealth and class stratification. Like some people really benefit from this revolutionary technology, some people don't, and there's a bit of class warfare going on too. I think that's a big part of cyberpunk as well.
Yeah, when we bring technology forward, we also bring capitalism with it, and it's
Of course.
all just shitty.
Gee,
Yeah,
that's that doesn't reflect anything in real life right now at all.
No, there's no parallels whatsoever.
Yeah.
All hail the powerful line, may it climb for eternity.
Let's not talk about how many monitors I'm surrounded by at this literal exact moment.
Well, I'm glad that
Six.
capitalism was mentioned because I do feel like that is sort of innately an element of cyberpunk. Like you could do cyberpunk in like a communist society or some sort of authoritarian regime, but I think part of cyberpunk is that there is an illusion of freedom. Like there is a placating of the masses through like digital bread and circus games that really kind of go hand in hand. Like the punk part is rebelling, but part of the thing they're rebelling from isn't just like a flat like like Star Wars isn't cyberpunk. Like it's science fiction, it has an authoritarian regime, it has rebels, but those rebels don't fit in the society innately. Like you could make it cyberpunk if you had to, but like that's not
There's a lot of robo arms.
yeah, but it's not the basics. Like, and likewise, robo arms can be in like a post-apocalyptic thing, but that also doesn't feel cyberpunk either. Like you kind of have to exist in the society that you're rebelling against, and like you kind of have to be questioning if your rebellion isn't just also part of the control.
Right.
Yeah, I think what's crucial is that sense of oppression and that kind of dystopian atmosphere of technology has led to, the promise of it is greater freedom and greater quality of life, but what it's actually led to is greater control for the people who either invented it or profit off of it. And that's where it's not really, it's like more anarcho-capitalism than authoritarian. It's just because companies are in charge now, not really governments. Like the companies are the mega corporations are the new governments in so many of these settings. And it's again with the real life parallels that comes from that promise of, at least you're not being oppressed by a government. It's still a corporation. Right. It's free enterprise, baby. Don't complain about it because it's not a government, so it's okay.
I was gonna say it's very funny because the idea of capitalism as being the antithesis to socialism, communism, Marxism, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, capitalism, when it's led to its natural conclusion, often resembles the authoritative regimes that people rebel against in the first place.
Yes.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting too, because I think like on top of like all of these themes, I think one of like my personal thoughts with things that like kind of ties into this, because like you guys also had mentioned that, like, you know, Star Wars and like other like post-apocalyptic stories will include a lot of these themes, but not necessarily feel cyberpunk. Like, a lot of my thought on that is more along the lines of, I think there's also an element of the visual theming of it. Like, I think cyberpunk is also where there's a huge emphasis on the big like city at night, the lights, the billboards, the like the colorful
All the
hairstyles.
neon.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah. Like, it's technology that is grotesquely overwhelming to a person who's not already familiar with it.
Right.
I like that. I really like that word. Overwhelming is actually what I think a good word for what I think like cyberpunk as both a literary theme and as a visual theme is, as I think like cyberpunk has this degree of intentionally overwhelming to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, this is sort of like a specific example, but I think one that sort of encapsulated how cyberpunk should be sort of viewed is in the comic Transmetropolitan. There's like this group of people who are like resurrected from our time in this like far future setting, and how they mostly go mad as soon as they like see the craziness of the future world. And like, this is a huge exaggerated like sci-fi setting, but you could imagine someone from like 1940 being brought into today and being overwhelmed by like everyone on their smartphones and having like electric cars that like get updates and every now and then just randomly explode, and you know, all the things that are going on in modern tech, where our way of thought is being sort of changed and shifted around in this weird like technological zeitgeist psychic field that we're all a part of. Like, it would be so terrifying to someone. And like, that's the thing. Like, cyberpunk works because we are in a current point looking at a future that we can't properly understand, because we don't have all the layers of context that we'd have to accumulate in that time.
Yeah. No,
I've always
that's
heard
really
it
good.
explained as, you know, if someone were to come and see a picture from 2019 of people on a subway, they would say, why are those people staring at those rectangles? Like, what is so enticing about those rectangles? I don't understand it.
Cats.
Exactly.
Cats, always.
That picture's mostly
Yeah, I would say they don't
arguing
need
with
to know.
arguing with strangers.
Yeah. Screaming at your phone's computer assistant thingy so it can deliver food to your doorstep. Like,
Weirdly enough,
it is-
this thing is entirely used to yell at your mother.
yell at everyone. Yell at anyone that you come in contact with. I mean, I also think for like what I think of when I think of cyberpunk is just also this either breaking down of barriers or just a blending of two opposite things. Like, you have the blending of man and machine. Sometimes you also see in like a lot of, you know, cyberpunk like games or media, like even like a blurring of like man and animal and whatnot. Like there's like genetic enhancements, there's like robotic enhancements, there's corporations becoming more of a ruling entity. Like, that's what I always think of. I just think of just like, you know, these things that we now very much in our own time are separate, are start to become closer and closer to being just one and the same.
Yeah, like this intentionally blurring line of philosophy questions that we might even think of as like too fundamental to even overthink now, as far as like, oh, what makes a person, you know, alive versus not alive? Are you still you if you're transferred into a computer, et cetera, et cetera?
Right.
Like, and I think like with all that though, and I think kind of keeping all that in mind, so like we've talked about like comics and movies and stuff. So are there forms of storytelling that we feel like, with all of this in mind, cyberpunk is more suited to or less suited to compared to other things? Like, one of the things I brought up is the sheer extent to which I've always perceived personally cyberpunk as being visual. So like, as a result, I kind of think cyberpunk tends to, as a genre, naturally lean into more visual storytelling mediums, that it makes more sense with a cyberpunk story to make it like a comic or a movie or a video game as opposed to a novel. Like, obviously that doesn't preclude it, but I think that part of my own thoughts on that own thing. Do you guys have thoughts on like genres that you think are better suited or less suited for that style of storytelling?
I will say I am a huge fan of novels. I love reading, but the problem with stories with like cyberpunk stories are it's a lot of showing. Like, you know, they always say show don't tell, and the problem is with novels is that when you're describing things with cyberpunk, it almost feels like HP Lovecraft a little bit, where you're like, the most amazing building as tall as you could ever believe it to be. You know, it becomes like the unspeakable horror type thing. And I feel like with visuals, like one of my favorite cyberpunk stories is Altered Carbon. Like, they released it on Netflix a while ago.
Oh yeah,
and it's awesome. And I think that, you know, trying to explain to someone what's happening there, you know, by being like, oh, this person, he's not him anymore. He's him, but he's in a new body. And it's like, that wouldn't really be as cool as when it's like, oh, hey, he woke up and now he's like a 12-year-old girl.
Yeah, there's something to be said for a story like that lacking the impact if you can't literally see it in front of you. I would just say, like, I think you guys both have a point when it comes to cyberpunk. It's definitely a visual genre. It's definitely about the dazzling spectacle of a future that you can barely comprehend, and if you can somehow make it visual, that helps sell the world, that helps build the world. I would say that novels have the strength of leveraging your imagination. I think sometimes when something's written the right way, your imagination, because, you know, like the joke goes, reading is just looking at slices of trees and hallucinating. Because like while you're doing that, the author can leverage the, you know, whatever happens. Everyone's imagination is different. It's all individual, and, you know, your own imagination fills in the gaps. And I think it takes the right author to make that happen. So I wouldn't say that, like, you can't have a good. I don't think anyone's saying that you can't have a good cyberpunk story in a novel.
No,
yeah,
I mean, Altered Carbon was a novel before
exactly.
It was a show. So
it's just
right, and then there's like definitive works like Neuromancer.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are just different strengths to each medium. Like, I think the strength of novels is, yeah, you can leverage the imagination. I think it's just it doesn't have the same impact as like a movie or a TV show or even a graphic novel that lets you play with the color and the shape of what this world actually, you know, takes the form of.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would agree that literature has the ability to do things that are just impossible in other mediums at a certain point, because you can describe things like cyberpunk as a genre, I would say, is birthed in literature, in novels. You could even make a case that the first like true sci-fi novel has cyberpunk elements, and that would be Frankenstein, because there is like this body modification stuff there. Like, effectively, it's a story about someone who has organ donors and has been shocked back to life. And like, that's stuff that we do now. It's just science being predicted and being appalled at its existence. That continues on. And as we develop more and more technology, we can start to articulate it better and better. And like, earlier works can first be expressed in literature because we don't have a visual language to sort of codify it. But then eventually, the more senses you can kind of bring in, the more directly effective it can be to a person who may not be as imaginative, or just how much more satisfying is it to actually present that in full glory in a way that like directly assaults your visual senses, you know, your auditory. Like, if you could get truly immersive ones, I think that's where you like start to like really really hit the potential of the genre, because it's already connected to technology anyway.
Well, it's funny. You mentioned auditory, and something that no one's touched on quite yet. And I feel like Lawrence will probably link up with this a little bit, because I know you do music composition. Like, I think a key point to Cyberpunk that we didn't mention is the sound, is the music in those things, and why I'd say the visual stuff is not more reaches me more because of just the visuals, because of the visuals and the sound. You know, again, with literature and graphic novels, you rely on your own mind to create that. But something that I think makes a lot of cyberpunk stories stand out to me, stuff that I've discussed on the shows that will be coming out this week, like The Matrix and Johnny Mnemonic and Blade Runner, and then Final Fantasy VII and Deus Ex, is all of them have great synth soundtracks, great sound design, and like it's funny. I would have never thought of the Final Fantasy VII music as cyberpunk. And I'm sorry to keep bringing it up, but I only realized this year that it's a cyberpunk story because I just was so steeped in it being Final Fantasy, which is unlike anything else, that I never made those connections. But like you listen to the battle theme, or even better, the Genova theme, which like has had so many different versions, a heavy metal version, a techno version, like all that stuff. Like there's absolutely cyberpunk soundscapes and composition elements in the Genova theme from Final Fantasy VII. And I think it's really fascinating when a movie or a game gets to tell that story, not just with the insane visuals and the bright lights, but with the synth soundscapes and the weird sound effects and like the tech stuff. Like even 18 and 16-bit video games that are cyberpunk, your Captain Commando or whatever else, also relied on less freedom to make this feel cyberpunk. And I think sound goes a long way into delivering that experience.
I think that's a great point that music, sorry, really quick, just music is a really underrated way to sell a world like that. I wouldn't have thought of that if you hadn't brought that up. So that's a great point.
Yeah. And I think
and if you see like I mean, it's funny if you actually see how the music is made with all of those synths. Like you have this giant Euro rack, which is just like this big hunk of, like a big electric box with a lot of modules plugged into each other, and then there's like flashing lights. It goes hand in hand. It's like even the instruments that they use to craft the music for this genre kind of fit within it itself. Just something that I've always kind of appreciated.
I once heard the like synth music making was called assaulting a robot. Just like twisting its knobs until it made noise. You're like, that's excellent.
What was it? I think one of the more interesting comparisons that I had heard, and I think this kind of ties into the music and the audio of it too, is that when you're in primarily audio visual genres compared to like descriptive genres like literature or even tabletop gaming, which is another one of the early kind of breeding grounds of cyberpunk. I think you have to remember that with written mediums are primarily focused on describing things that are difficult to show. So that can be things like metaphors and analogies, a character's thoughts, like kind of more like descriptions, thoughts, and emotions that may be difficult to show on a camera. Whereas visual and audio storytelling methods, like the video games and the audio that we're talking about, those tend to focus a little bit more on showing things that are difficult to easily describe.
For sure.
Yeah.
And you know, synths in themselves, you know, when they started to come into mainstream music, where it was a very cyberpunk thing. You had all of these guys that were more classically trained on instruments, and now here you have like this keyboard or something that makes all of these like different strange electronic sounds. So when you talk about something that's like very future forward, I think like all aspects, I feel like everything that's like early, look at early sci-fi movies, you didn't really have a huge sound selection. It was like we could do classical orchestra, or we can bust out these like, you know, Moog synths and then make these like electronic arpeggiator sounds.
We could take a tungsten rod and slap some power lines.
And like it became like kind of synonymous with those type of you know, those type of movies, the genre overall, because like you can express a lot of the darker like overtones of the cyberpunk world.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention music and albums separate from films and video games also being cyberpunk. You know, artists like Eyeshadow 2600, who I've mentioned on Reignite, who's done a lot of Mass Effect music. A ton of their stuff is very cyberpunk. And then there's a nerdcore rapper who I'm a big fan of named YT Cracker, who did a whole album called Introducing Niels, which took place in this fictional cyberpunk world about hackers. And like it has very synthy music with a lot of hip hop beats mixed in, or even Vangelis, who's been around forever doing soundtracks to so many different movies and also doing original scores and original albums. Like making things that could very easily be defined as cyberpunk, even if that wasn't the initial creation process for some of this music. You can imagine those worlds through the sounds they're creating. And I think it's important to acknowledge that as well. And there's probably plenty of artists that I'm not even thinking of who've made cyberpunk stories through their music with no visual or written connection to it.
Yeah.
I think that the strong point for cyberpunk, regardless of medium, is the way that you convey detail. Like I think a broad view of cyberpunk, you always kind of lose the elements that sort of make it cyberpunk. Like the benefit of the genre, or rather the appeal of the genre, is the ability to go in and see like, oh, it's dystopian because of X, Y, and Z. And if you step back too far, it just becomes general sci-fi, or even not even really that. Like if you're not paying attention to how fucked up the society is, and like how messed up what they're doing to everyone's bodies, and like how gross it is, like it just doesn't register, and it doesn't feel punk, it doesn't feel cyber, it just is out there as a sci-fi thing.
And it can't feel like a happy place either. I feel like that's sort of an unwritten rule. Like there has to be some sort of depressive atmosphere of
someone has to be fucking miserable.
Because like if you had a setting where technology had advanced to the point where everyone's like, it's post scarcity, no one struggles for anything anymore, everyone's needs are taken care of.
That point.
Yeah, you get Star Trek.
You just have what's called utopian fiction. You just like there's a series of books that I know a lot about, but I haven't read. They're called the Culture series by Ian Banks, I think. I'm probably getting the name wrong, but it's a series of sci-fi novels about an alien society that was so advanced that there was no conflict anymore. Everyone lived peacefully and happily, and it was great. It's one of the few fiction franchises where everything just goes fine. And like they still have conflict with outside societies that don't understand how the culture works. And like, wait, so no one starves, no one struggles for anything? Does not compute. But like you can't have that.
Where's the fun in that?
I know, exactly. Like cyberpunk wouldn't be cyberpunk if you had a post-scarcity, like technology solved everything sort of world building. Because I think, not to bring us back to what the themes are, but I think technology didn't solve all the problems that humanity had. It's kind of an unwritten rule there too.
Well, can I also say, I feel like it doesn't necessarily have to be like completely dark. I just think it has to be natural. Because like the game that I talked about, Valhalla, and even like the counterpart in the same universe, 2064, was pretty it had like a lot of dark themes to it, but it was also like very lighthearted. Like Valhalla, you learn about the like sort of dystopian part of the world through conversations that you have with people, but like otherwise it's pretty normal. Like you have people going to cons, you have people who are just living their lives and working, and then you have people that are a floating brain in a jar that's like trying to help scientists figure out how like we can push things even further. I'm like
corgi in a Hawaiian shirt and sunglasses.
Right, who hates other, they're like almost have this like sort of like prejudice against other types of dogs. And like 2064, same thing. They have very, very like lighthearted moments where you have an AI kind of discovering what it means to be sentient. And then you have very, very dark moments where you realize that there are people who have to go through genetic treatments because of terminal illness, but there is legislation that's brought against them that like makes them like lesser than human and even prevents them from like reproducing. So there's like the ebb and flow of real life, I think is what makes something cyberpunk, because like, it's not always bad, but it's not always good too. And I think that's something that we can really relate to now.
Yeah.
It's not always bad, but it's not always good either. Like,
sure. Yeah, like I think complications are a big part of that. Like, you can have a robot arm in any sort of sci-fi piece, but if that robot arm requires you to take medication so you don't get an infection, that feels much more cyberpunk right there.
Right. Or if you have nano machines inside of your body that help enhance your liver so you can drink more, but then someone's using them to track you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's like
There's
having a
that-
cell phone. I can order food and have it delivered to my front door, and then I can also just have all of my information, unwillingly be sold to the highest bidder.
Right.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
that.
Well,
There's that
and that's
loss
actually a
of
good point
control,
there too, because there's a benefit as well. Like 1984, for example, could feel cyberpunk, but it doesn't. Like it just feels
just
dystopian,
dystopian.
and
Yeah.
dark. But like we're not focused on the people who have a little bit of freedom on the ground level. We're focused on the mid-tier people. We don't really find out much about how the technology works. It's kind of just it's very surface. We don't get the specifics of the world, and we don't see the benefits of the society, which makes it more complicated and makes the rebellion something that you actually have to like truly embrace and actually give up things for.
Mhm. There's an indie cyberpunk game I've played recently called Ruiner. It's by Devolver Digital. And there's that sense of that Lawrence mentioned, like a world that can be dystopian or dark, or maybe not so dystopian and dark, but at least it has some level of relatability and there's a real world parallel to it. Ruiner has this interesting kind of world building aspect to it where it's taking place in kind of a vaguely Asian environment. It's kind of like there's that Neo Tokyo kind of trope, like there's always a futuristic Asian city, but there's a gang of enemies that you fight, and there's like lore entries that say that they're all third children who fell into a life of crime, and you just keep seeing this term third children pop up. So like there's this idea that, oh, okay, so I guess there's like population control measures in this world, and if a family has more than 2 kids, then those third children usually become drifters and criminals. And it's just there's things that we can sort of connect to the real world there, where this isn't just completely off the wall, robots killing each other with laser katanas. There's a real world nugget of something we can relate to there, and I think that's really important for any kind of fiction, but especially with cyberpunk, you have to like be able to somehow on some level insert yourself there and feel like this could happen. It's not likely, but there's some sort of level of relatability there.
Yeah, because like in Valhalla, you learn about like this military police group that like they save people, they're first responders, they do a lot of good, and they wear these like special suits, and then like halfway through the game you realize that there's like really deep corruption, and that's after meeting someone who really is like the pinnacle of what it would mean to be in this role. They're super nice, they're dedicated, they love helping people, they are completely selfless, but the organization overall is corrupt. And so it comes out, and the response from the public is like they start killing members of the police, the police force, because like you come to find out that this is something that's been going on for a long time and is boiled to a point, and then society just kind of they snapped. But like there is, you don't get that unless you actually talk to this person. So there is like that sort of kind of bringing it back to real world. It's like, we have like, there is the definition of what an authority figure is, or like what they're supposed to do. And then like, there are the things that we all know based off of what we've seen.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with all of that like kind of in mind, and kind of this like more complex, broad, I guess the history and the very different flavors of cyberpunk as a genre. So the actual cyberpunk game that's coming out is kind of coming into this genre with a interesting kind of complex pedigree and history, with all of these themes kept in mind, with because like even the developer is one of like the bigger AAA developers coming out, where it's one of the more ambitious developers like in the industry right now. Then on top of that, the planned scope of the game it's one of the largest planned open world games as far as like how deep it plans to go. And on top of that, it's been in development for a ridiculously long period of time. So I guess kind of
25 years now.
And even then, the tabletop RPG that it's based off of is one of the earliest and most definitive examples of cyberpunk as a genre, where it first came out relatively early in the existence of the genre and was one of the more defining aspects of what a cyberpunk society is kind of supposed to look like. So I guess kind of with that in mind, and kind of like, as much as we're going to get to both like the positives and negatives, like what are some of your expectations as far as what we think this game's going to have, or as far as things that we hope this game could have for those that have kind of something as far as that goes?
Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it's got Keanu Reeves, and that sets the bar pretty high.
You can always count on him. Yeah.
I don't know. For me, I think like I feel like and this could just be me, and also because of other complications with the development of this game and the studio, which we'll get to after this.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the advertising has been completely inconsistent. Like there have been a bunch of CG trailers which show you the cool world and stuff, which is always great to see initially for any game. But like a lot of the gameplay previews have been very muddled in also cutscenes and like quick cuts, and like they clearly don't want to show us everything yet. I mean,
I was gonna say all the marketing material we've seen is probably from the first like 2-3 hours of the game.
yeah,
Most likely.
like they're keeping it all under wraps. And like for me also, I think something that I have complicated feelings with this game is I've hit a point in my game playing life where large open world games that are 100 hours long terrify and intimidate me, because
Yes.
I'm already recently got re-addicted, and Connor knows this because I've actually been playing with him. I got re-addicted to Destiny 2, which takes up a lot of your time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to play indie games. Of course, I'm covering stuff for fun and games and side quests, and like also other new games coming out. And so the idea of a 100-hour open world, completely customizable game, to me, my expectation initially is that I don't know if I'm going to be able to sit and play it, or if I do, I might abandon it, because like I loved Skyrim when it first came out, which is another game that I think is on a similar scope. And I played it so much when it first came out. And then anytime I tried to go back to it after the first couple of playthroughs, I get overwhelmed. You start the game up, you have like 3 missions, and those 3 missions lead to another 3 missions. And then I'm looking at a list of 6 missions, plus I need to start working on gathering materials to make my armor. And I go, I can't do this. I have too much shit to do in real life. This is too much. Like, and then I jump into a game like Shovel Knight, where it's like a straight line. I just go from stage to stage, hitting people with a shovel. And that seems way more manageable to me. And so I think my first initial expectation, on a negative end that has nothing to do with the developers of the game itself and just my own personal preference, is that I think it might be too much. I think it's just going to be overwhelming. Now, of course, until I get my hands on it, I don't know. But that's like my initial thought is, oh God, can I even jump into this world?
Matt, I absolutely know what you're talking about. In fact, just last night, the sales were going on, and Other Worlds was on sale for 50% off. And I looked at my girlfriend and I said, I want to buy this, but Cyberpunk comes out in 10 days. And yes, I'm laughing at myself because I know it might get delayed again. And I said, should I get this? She goes, well, both of them are super long, so probably just wait for Cyberpunk. And I was like, yeah, you're right, because I can't invest the time into 2 expansive RPGs that'll take 40 plus hours each, because I barely play video games as it is with my responsibilities that I have.
Yeah,
being an adult sucks, guys.
It does.
Yeah, well, and that's also my rebuttal to Matt right there, which is like, I'm a man in my 30s. I don't have time to play like a massive open world game. There's a ton that I still own that I'm like, yeah, someday I'll play, but I'm just never going to. Like, I just know that. But I think back to being in high school when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, and the ability to sort of just explore this like rich world. And like I said, the strength of Cyberpunk is when it can get really detailed. And like we've seen stuff that looks like it's going to have a lot of that like detail, like a real world to sort of like live in, when you're not able to go outside and hang out with your friends, like in a pandemic, could be really great for a big group of people. I just know that like it's probably not going to be that thing for me.
Yeah, that's why I'm like not sure what's going to happen with it. I'm kind of on the fence too, because the time commitment is definitely intimidating, especially hearing that one of the developers has put like 175 hours into it and still hasn't beaten it. And it's like that like worries the hell out of me. And but the thing, and I do wonder if maybe the consumer base is a little burnt out on that type of game where it just takes forever to complete it and it's such a huge time commitment. But at the same time, I think that people kind of expect that from CD Projekt Red. They have the pedigree of being the developers of Witcher 3, which is still so highly acclaimed and so many people love it, that I think people are kind of expecting that same scope of, I'm going to get lost in this world for literal years of my actual real life, and I'm okay with that, and I'm ready for that. I think people are expecting that and ready for that, but at the same time, I do wonder if maybe that type of game is going to maybe fall out of vogue a tiny bit. Like maybe fewer people might be asking for that in the near future. But I do think that one thing we're going to get, aside from Keanu Reeves, that's guaranteed we're getting him, but one thing we're definitely going to get is that level of detail that they brought to the world of The Witcher. Like the Northern Realms, Novigrad were such vivid environments that felt like people actually lived there, and you as the character actually interact with it in a real way. And I'm sure we're going to get that in Night City. Like if there's one thing I'm sure of, I'm certain that CD Projekt Red created a very living city that feels real, and I'm expecting that much. Otherwise, I'm not sure what's really coming down the pike. But the time thing, the commitment of just the sheer volume and scale of this game is intimidating for sure.
See, I kind of feel like one thing I'm expecting is, like, I don't know. I do know that, like, I think what we touched on earlier a little bit when we were like, Cyberpunk has to be dark, and my opposition is that, like, kind of just has to be natural. I almost feel like it's gonna be too dark in a lot of aspects.
I actually agree with that.
And like that's one of the things where it's like, I want to buy this game. I'm probably gonna buy this game, and I'll play it for as long as I can. But like I think it's like, I don't want to say Grand Theft Auto Cyberpunk, but like that's all they've kind of given us. But I have this thing where I feel like it's going to be too heavily focused on the criminal organization aspect, and it's going to like impact the world building, because like, wherever you are, it's not realistic that your city is 100% crime. Like
this isn't Gotham City.
Exactly. And like, you may be a criminal yourself, but I don't think that even a criminal lives life as a criminal 100% of their time. And so I'm curious to see if there's anything in the game that breaks up that experience and makes it a little bit, doesn't necessarily have to be like, I am donating toys to children, but like,
but that would be an amazing side quest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To that point, there is a aspect of that. There are, like, I've heard that there are certain sections of the city in the in-game world that are more heavily policed than others. Like, there are parts of the city where you can go and do whatever the hell you want, and the cops barely care and don't really look for you. And then there are the really bougie, kind of like high society parts of the city where you gotta keep your nose clean. You can't, break any laws. So there's at least some dichotomy of, it's not complete anarchy. It's not like a total free for all at all times in Night City.
See, but I wonder if it's like criminal classism, like, or it's just like, we're rich, we're evil. Or
a little bit. It's we can get away with it because we have money. That's
like, we're rich, we're evil, or we're in the slums, we're evil. So like that's kind of what I mean. Like, like I look at, like, if a non-Cyberpunk game that came out recently is like the Miles Morales game, and like, he's Spider-Man and you're Spider-Man throughout the entire game, but throughout the game he also deals with like the issue of like moving to a new place, like finding himself, dealing with old friendships. Like, he's got a lot of internal conflicts, and does things that aren't necessarily so through the lens of being Spider-Man, where it's more of like him trying to make a decision that feels good to him. So like, I kind of want those types of things. Like, you're a criminal, but you're not just a criminal. Like, what else is the main character?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I always think back to everyone's favorite Grand Theft Auto 4, when you get the phone call, "Hey Nico, you want to go bowling?" And it's like that, because that shows that, hey, it's not all about stealing cars and running over people. It's they add in life there, where you had like bowling outings, and you had like getting a date, and going to dinner and stuff like that. It's like, So it mixed in the criminal element with the, hey, I'm just a guy trying to experience America. So I to your point, I think I agree, Lawrence. I hope there's like, go to the space bar and get some alien noodles with your friend Karen.
Yeah,
Yeah. As long as it's fun. Like the gameplay loop has to be rewarding. Like
Yes.
that's why like Shenmue was a technical marvel when it came out, and like look how cool a big world that feels real is. And then going back to it, it's just not as satisfying to like try to play through.
Right.
Mhm.
But you just don't want like a Ghost Hunter, which, sorry,
Yeah.
Ghost Hunter developers, if you see this, but like nobody wants to play a game where you literally just jump off of walls and cut people's heads off with a katana. It's cool at first, and then it just gets really, really, really boring.
Yeah. And I think like you look at every major open world game, especially the ones that are considered to be in some way genre defying. So things like Fallout, like Bethesda's Fallout and Skyrim games, or Witcher, you look at those. And I think to Lawrence's point, there's a lot of a holistic aspect of what the gameplay loop is. And I think like that's actually a really good point you bring up, that it isn't just the one thing you're doing the entire time in this world. I think like you look at Fallout, like Fallout 4 has a significant amount of settlement building, has time, even Fallout 3 and New Vegas have times you go into cities and build relationships with NPCs through that aren't just people you're fighting. If Cyberpunk ends up turning into this world where it's 100% either people you're fighting with and people you're fighting alongside, and there's no middle ground, then I think that's going to do a disservice. You can put as much detail into every individual as you want, but if those are the only two categories we're going to get, then that's going to be a hugely limiting factor.
You make a good point, because like also, and to Lawrence's point about the story, and like that you need to, there's got to, like, if you're just a bad guy or a criminal, there's no redemption, and like that can be fun, but ultimately I don't care about those stories anymore. Binary stories bore me. Like I need diversity, but also like a lot of people, like this game just looks so serious. And I like a serious story, but even referring to Witcher 3, there are so many great comedic moments in Witcher 3 of just bonkers stuff that Geralt doesn't know how to handle. And like, for me, narratively, the game series that has ruined me for serious stories is Yakuza. And the reason is because Yakuza, on a basic narrative level, is one of the most serious and soap opera style stories that you can tell in video games. It's so great and so masterfully written. But what's brilliant about Yakuza 0 specifically is that the main story is so serious and like just not basic, but like moves forward in a dramatic way. And yet the side stories, like you win a chicken in a bowling tournament, like you build a real estate, like and it doesn't take away from the serious story. The serious story is still serious and emotional and brings a tear to your eye, but they still don't mind being goofy as hell in the side stories or some of the other interactions. So many dramatic stories for so long, especially in games, is like you're either super serious and dark or you're not. And I think larger RPGs have done it better, like your Mass Effects and your Dragon Ages and Skyrim's, Fallouts have had those comedic beats. And it just doesn't seem like Cyberpunk has it. Now, that said, I don't know that we glean that from Witcher in the trailers either. So it's possible that those moments are there, but we just haven't seen them yet. But I'm really worried that this is just going to be like a super serious game that takes itself too seriously.
See, I think of 2064 read-only memory again.
Mm-hmm.
And what my favorite part of this was like learning, you know, you have like this overarching like mystery that you need to solve throughout the game, but you learn a lot about people. And I think it's what you know adds to the dark overtones, but it is also what keeps things light at the appropriate time. Like you know, there's this man that owns this bar with his husband, and ordering a drink is funny because he can never remember anything, but his husband remembers like everything, all the ingredients immediately. And like then as you talk to them, you learn a little bit more about their lives, and you learn about how they were both involved in shady dealings, and then they decided to get clean. You know, but the partner that remembers all the drinks, they were still had kind of a foot into the shady dealings to keep the bar afloat, because they were doing it so that their husband could realize, you know, their dream of owning a legitimate business. I'll appreciate that in games, you know, Cyberpunk and otherwise. And that's what I really want this game to bring. Something where, like, yeah, I might, blast someone's brains out or something, and it's like, ha, 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 but I also want to like learn about the world, and I want to learn about the world through the people that are there. So like, ultimately, if I'm committing a crime or whatever, like, is there a reason for me to commit this crime, or am I committing this crime because like me criminal, me love crime?
Yeah.
Because like,
I want to
that'll
know why
burn me
my
out.
Glock is up this guy's throat.
Right. Like, why am I about to like shoot Lenny in the neck? Is it because like I just want to, or is it because like, he did something that impacted a bunch of people, and then here I am now. Like, and I think that's just good storytelling overall. Like, give a reason to why I'm here and why I'm doing this and why I need to do these things. And I think what we see with some larger open world games is like that falls off after a while. Like, it seems like at the height of the game, it's there, and then after a while, it kind of just like trickles off. Like, I love Breath of the Wild. I think it suffered from that, to be honest.
Would agree. Mm-hmm.
Like, I was like, all right, I'm so deep into this. Why am I doing this? Oh yeah, I'm doing it for this reason. Like, move along. But it's like not rewarding. You have to be rewarded, I think, with larger portions of a greater story at that point. I think that's what keeps me doing side quests. That's what keeps me doing main quests, and that's what keeps me interested overall.
I have to beat Ganon. Why? It's Ganon.
Right.
I'll be honest, I'd be really, really, really shocked if you don't get that kind of nuance and narrative tension from 2077. I can't see why that wouldn't be there, because I mean, these are the people who made Witcher 3, and the Witcher 3's main quest was all about, you've reached this mile marker, but the story has changed and your motivations have changed, and there's always a character-driven reason for Geralt doing what he's doing. I would be knocked on my ass if 2077 turns out to not have that kind of nuance to it.
But how it can not have that kind of nuance to it? How's that? If it's not a diverse like representation of the world around it.
Right, and I'm just saying all indications point to it being that. So,
but I mean, like with Cyberpunk, there's more than just your half like mechanical man.
Sure, yeah.
Thing like that's what I'm saying. Like you can pull all the paint of Cyberpunk into a game, but like it's not always guaranteed to have that quality. So like I think that CD Projekt Red is a nice development studio, but I think that this is I think that this is something that can't be missed, and it can be missed by mistake.
It could be. I just don't think it's likely. That's all I'm saying.
I think, and I think kind of like tying a little bit into what Lawrence is talking about, and kind of like getting onto like the next element of this, like. Because like while this game's been getting developed, we've also been seeing and hearing all these like significant like issues and controversies that have been coming from the game's development. So like obviously there's all these examples of like transphobia coming from the developers and from the different advertisements in the game. The tendency that the game's been leaning into crunch culture, although to the crunch culture, I think that's they did end up delaying themselves again, so while it's still been there, I think there's an element of, I think they also know that that's not something the community's responding well to, at least that the crunch specifically. But I mean, especially dialing back to things like the transphobia and the issues we've been seeing from from that end of the community with the game, like, I mean, none of us can really personally speak to the experiences of like our transgender friends and family, but like I do think it's also like significant to acknowledge that kind of for a lot of what we've seen so far, it looks like CD Projekt Red is kind of dropping the ball in an important way in kind of how they're portraying this. And I think that is something kind of that does need to be acknowledged, as far as like both the nature of what Cyberpunk as a genre is supposed to be about, as well as like the pedigree and the design behind this game particularly.
Yeah, I think they're in a rough spot in terms of like what they're trying to present, because body modification is such an inherent part of cyberpunk as a genre that it can't help but be sort of paralleled with like the actual advances in medical technology in the real world. So like it's hard not to have those themes in there. Like I think that's just it goes hand in hand, because we're talking about the possibilities of science and also the parts that make some people react. Um, so we see that they clearly are leaning into it in the game. We don't know actually how it looks really once you get into the game. We just know what their social media team has done and what their trailers have done, and some of those sort of play to older jokes or stereotypes in a bad way that is kind of concerning. But also culture is moving forward very rapidly right now, so like some of the things that I've seen in trailers we probably wouldn't have responded to 5 years ago.
Oh, sure.
For sure, yeah.
Definitely.
I think a big part of it is there are some jokes that, like, for sure, we're learning. Like I always say, if you watch something and love something problematic, if you acknowledge its problems, you're making a step in the right direction. Like there are old movies I still love that definitely have jokes that are not okay for a variety of reasons. But as long as we're aware of that, and not necessarily even always publicly talking about it, but if we make acknowledge of it or accept it if it's pointed out, that's a big difference. And I think what's really weird with CD Projekt Red here is to be so I don't want to say anti-trans. I want to say, well, yeah, I mean, maybe anti-trans for sure in some of their language and what they've been saying, but then to create a game where they highlighted very early on that gender doesn't matter. You can choose your body type and what you want to look like, regardless of the hard-coded textbook definition of gender, seemed like such a huge deal and such a great and big stride. And then for them to have anti-trans sentiments in their behind-the-scenes stuff or certain members of the team, it's just baffling to me. And then like rumors of like racist issues, and then the crunch culture too. None of this is new to gaming, right? None of this is new to any industry. All of this stuff is coming up more because people are feeling more comfortable to be more open about this stuff. While I am not a person who's trans, I have many friends who are, and a lot of them have written off this game immediately and said they're not going to buy it because of those things. And that makes sense. I openly have admitted on multiple platforms and podcasts that I never bought and will never buy Red Dead Redemption 2 because of what they put their studio. They openly gloated about putting their studio through. I, on the same degree, did not shame anyone who did buy it or played it or even loves that game, because I also have a friend who did a voice in that game. My friend Scott Thomas is a voice of a character in that game, and that was so cool to see. It's complicated, and I don't think there's a clear answer. There's a clear answer to how you feel about, of course, supporting our trans brethren and how to support them in that community and to work against racism and against transphobia. But a developer of this size, with people who I'm sure there are developers who worked on this game who just want you to buy it because it's their job, it's their livelihood, and they put their heart and soul into it and aren't backing necessarily these horrible sentiments. It gets so muddy, and I think it's important to discuss it. I don't know that we're going to have a clear answer on this this week of awesome content or this particular show for how to fix it. But, I think it is definitely worth discussing, as Caleb brought up.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth having the conversation, because some of the advertisements that they've had in there, like all of the, like the change them up stuff, which I was like, those are really not okay things to put into your game. And I think it was just like you mentioned, acknowledging it seemed like they kind of were more defensive than actually like attempting to acknowledge and fix the issue. And I know that one thing that I've seen from in the cyberpunk genre from some of the games and content is there normally is some sort of, even though you have all this human progress, there is always sort of this divide amongst people, more of like a naturalist, like enhancers type division. So, but I think if you're to display something like this in your advertisement, in your early advertisements of a game, it's owed an explanation, like whether this is something in the game that's a big part of the story or something else. Like I always go back to the 2064 read-only memories, because they had such an awesome dialogue from a character that was like a hybrid, and their experience, they originally became a hybrid because like they had a terminal disease and they had to, in their first version of themselves, they were like spliced with like fly DNA, and people avoided them, and they had to go through they went through all of this headache and this nightmare, and then they were able to do gene splicing again and become like a fox person. But they were like, I've been so enhanced by now, like the government is regulated that like I can't reproduce and I can't do these things. And I know that there are a lot of other people that are in my situation that are oppressed. So I go and I fight for them. And you deal with like the counter group that doesn't like, that hybrids exist, and they make up all of like the same arguments that any other hate group now makes up. Like, oh, we don't hate these people. It's just, these nuanced reasons that we're out here protesting the thing that like their the way they live their lives. And so I think like if you have anything in there that is supposed to show like, hey, this might be like something that's going on in the world, it's up to the developers to explain that to people. Yeah. And I think that they haven't done a good job. When I look at from the side of race, it goes back to my earlier comment about it not being too dark, because what I hate in games, especially like in Grand Theft Auto, is like when you have the seedy belly of this criminal underworld. For some reason, every ethnicity seems to be broken up into its own gang. Yeah. And your gang is based off of your ethnicity, and then it's normally like minorities and then white gang.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like, I hope it's not just about like criminal activity, because from what I've seen and from what I've heard some people talk about, they expressed similar sentiment. Like, you don't want to have your all black gang, your all Latino gang, your all Asian gang, and then everyone else is just like your rich gang is just all white people. So like that I'm still like, I haven't heard anything about, but I'm kind of expecting it to go that way, because that seems like the trope in video games that no one has ever really addressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely disappointing when a studio is does seem to make some of these progressive overtures, like Matt mentioned, the character selection being less about a gender binary and more about just kind of your preference of presentation. And that's a nice step for a developer to take, but then you notice also just generally, I mean, I don't want to get too into the weeds of like the detailed examples, but like just generally not being a good ally. And
yeah,
I think that's really the conversation that I hear a lot is just no one's asked like I mean, I don't want to put the trans community in a box or anything, but I feel like what we ask for is just effort. Just recognize when harm has been done and mitigate it whenever you can. It's just make the effort to be a better ally. That's really all anyone ever asks for. No one's asking for perfection, be perfectly woke all the time. Just try to be aware of it, try to recognize it, and don't propagate it if harm has been done. And I think CD Projekt Red has fallen short on some of those aspects where just they haven't been a good ally all the time, and it's disappointing to see. Hopefully hopefully they wise up to that, and we have this conversation of do you buy the game, do you boycott it, like we've already talked about. Like that's a personal preference. That's like a vote with your dollars type thing. Follow your conscience, really. I'm not going to tell anybody skip this game, buy it, it's up to you. But there was that article or blog that came out as kind of a compilation of CD Projekt Red's transphobic, or at least borderline transphobic behaviors, that it does mention, hey, I, the person compiling this, writing this, am not telling you don't buy this game. I'm just telling you be aware of what's being talked about. And that's for me, it just comes back to that. Just be aware, try and be an ally, make the effort. If you want to buy the game, just be aware of what's been surrounding it. And
don't buy the game and then go, yeah, but I still love trans. Like, it's not that simple.
Sure.
Like, if you're buying the game, you have to also engage in this conversation. You can't, I don't think you can buy this game and just go, yeah, but I don't care about that political stuff, because
don't be willingly blind to it. Don't just fall asleep and sleepwalk through this media product that we're all having a conversation about. Like, to me, it comes back to kind of that artist and the art conversation of, can you separate, like, for example, I have always loved the books of Orson Scott Card. Ender's Game was one of my favorite books of all time, and that series is a great series. I really enjoyed those books. Orson Scott Card, the person, the author, is kind of a piece of shit. He's a big raging homophobe. And so you have to, you know, if I'm going to acknowledge I enjoy these works of fiction, I also acknowledge and understand and have a problem with the man who wrote them. So it's like, it's just, if you're going to enjoy media, just have that understanding and make that effort of analyzing the people who made it, the sort of cultural issues that surround it. Just be aware of it.
And I'd add the impacted groups on top of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because, you know, none of us here we're obviously like cisgendered men.
Yeah, sure.
So like that, you know, like I don't personally know the experiences of, you know, any trans person, so I don't want to speak for them. But I also think that, you know, if you are making the argument of, like, I want to stay out of the politics or whatnot, I'm always of the opinion, like, maybe you should have a conversation with the groups that are impacted so you can understand the issue a little bit better.
For sure.
Listen to them before you listen to me or us about, like, that's bottom line. Like, what I say is very secondary to any voices from the trans community, for sure.
One thing I want to bring up is that it is possible that people are listening to this video and are not aware of even some of this, because like I tried to do a dive into how much this was being talked about, and most of the issues that I found bringing up trans comments on the internet, or rather the trans community in relation to this game, was actually like the worst people being mad that there were even like including transgender people because it was too political, and like like how grossed out they were by that, and that you could have a non-binary slider for your character, and all that being seen on the other side of things. So like it is also interesting to see just like how muddy this water can get.
I think a big problem is we live in a world, like, I think in a, thank God, almost post-Trump world, we can't say keep politics out of my games. We can't say keep politics out of anything, because it's also not political to believe in human rights, and transgender people deserve human rights. Full stop. End of story. And I think what drives me crazy about the gamer conversation, big finger quotes, is that they don't want politics in their game, but there's nothing political about general human rights. And it's this idea that everything is political. Full stop, period, end of story. And we will always be having difficult conversations. Period. Full stop, end of story.
The personal is the political, and the political is the personal. Everything about politics affects people's personal lives, and you can't separate it. And politics are a part of real life, and interactive media like video games will mirror real life. I'm sorry, it's going to happen. Like,
also, if you play, if you throw the politics argument and then play Call of Duty,
really,
exactly.
I
did see a great Hardnet article that was just it said now non-binary people can commit war crimes too, and I thought that was very funny to me.
That's progress, man.
And the big thing that I wanted to reach out to is I just think it's very funny that people have a hard time believing that in the same universe that a man can replace his entire body with cybernetics, they can also have boobs and a penis.
Like, why is that hard to believe?
Why is that hard to believe for some people?
What's difficult?
Right. Like, internet sucks.
It's an agenda. I don't like it.
The internet sucks and it's bled into real life, or real life sucks and it's bled into the internet. I can't tell at this point. 2020 is crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the problem. Like, the real world has now actually become very cyberpunk, and so it's like that's why it's hard to look at this as
cyberpunk. It's like
cyberpunk light.
I don't get the robot arms. I just get the ability to yell at people all the time, every day.
A digital rectangle that's an extension of our body.
Well, you're just not paying attention to it, because like we do have prostheses, we do have artificial hearts, we do have all these things.
But it's not as cool. Like I can't voluntarily, like I can't punch a hole through the wall with my robot arm now.
Yeah,
but I can yell at my aunt on Twitter, you know?
I think back when the internet was mostly like message boards where you could be anonymous. I think internet and real life were separate back then, but that's not really the case anymore when everyone's identities are completely online and like your information is available. Like privacy doesn't really exist anymore. Privacy is a thing of the past.
But I
And
used the safe search when I was looking at things the other night. That means they can't find me, right?
that's a start. I have some bad news for you though.
Oh, no.
But no,
It was for research, I swear.
Internet and real life are not separate anymore. Like the internet is the real world now, because people are who they are. And there's proxies and VPNs, but it's howling, it's crying in the rain, man. And I'm sorry, like there's no such thing as privacy anymore. No, that's for me the conversation of is the internet real life, and is the real life the internet? And that's our cyberpunk dystopia that we deal with now. Like we live in that dystopia of opinion being shaped in this way that's so non-communal and so disconnected from any sense of shared humanity.
I think the most cyberpunk aspect of our modern day life is the ability to see the thoughts and feelings of other people, regardless of if we want to or not.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I think, like I said, with kind of like all of that in mind, and kind of like with all of that kind of like coming full circle with kind of what cyberpunk is and the way that our like world is turning cyberpunk, kind of what the whole plan for this entire week is like partly out of anticipation, like positive, negative, neutral, or fearful of this game, but like also out of a broad excitement for this entire genre and what it's represented both historically and like currently. And so I think kind of with that, I think let's talk a little bit about I guess what we're going to be able to see from each of our channels in this coming week, and I think kind of where to find them. So Matt and Case, if you guys want to talk about what you guys are doing this week.
Well, real quick, I do want to shout out that we do have another network that no one is represented here today, but who is participating with us, which is Geek Elite Media.
Mm-hmm.
So for a certain point of view, I've got a crossover episode of Another Pass actually with Ian from Geek Elite Media. We're talking about Matrix Revolutions because it is Keanu Reeves, and it also is created by trans artists, the Wachowskis, so that we felt that that was a good way to sort of uplift that. And that one straddles the line discussing the difference between cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic, because you kind of have both. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, I also am doing a show of Men of Steel with Lawrence, where J. Mike and I are talking about Doom Patrol, done by Rachel Pollack, who took over the book after Grant Morrison left. She was one of the first trans creators in comics, and so this was really exciting. And it's Doom Patrol is robot people and brains just kind of, or like heads in a jar, and all kinds of like crazy cyberpunk stuff. So it felt like good genre stuff to talk about.
On the other side, for certain POV, Screen Snark is bringing back our second guest ever on the show, Patrick Willems, who, as I've mentioned before, is the king of Keanu content on the internet. We are, of course, diving deep into Johnny Mnemonic, which is one of the best bad movies and bizarrest bad good cyberpunk movies I've ever seen. And seeing it as an adult after seeing it as a young adult was kind of mind-blowing, just to see the charted course of Keanu Reeves' career and how you can see some of his characters even that early on. So that's Screen Snark, me and Rachel Corky Shank talking with Patrick Willems about Johnny Mnemonic. And then on the fun and games side, Jeff and I had the incredible Connor Howard as a guest, and we talk about cyberpunk and video games. We don't really talk about the new cyberpunk game because it's not out as of when we recorded it, but we talk about just the genre of cyberpunk, how it's spread across video games, and how certain games were more or less cyberpunk than we thought, and some of our favorites. And so that you can tune into that as well.
And I think with Lore Party, I think most of us here have content that we're doing with that, because I know me and Lawrence are having a really good conversation with Stephen Clark from Geek Elite Media on the Cyberpunk game Valhalla, which we've talked about a bunch of times, even today in this discussion. And then I had a really good conversation with Bavia that we're going to be having a good chat about the very similar and yet wildly different game, Red Strings Club. And we're doing an episode on that. And then Connor, you can speak to your thing.
Sure. Yeah. Like Matt said, I had a wonderful conversation with him and Jeff recently about Cyberpunk broadly. So that was a great time. Looking forward to that coming out. And on the Lore Party side, I recently sat down with Michael Ferris, who's the host and producer of our minigame spinoff podcast. Had a really wonderful time talking to him about Deus Ex, specifically Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, sort of the Adam Jensen saga. We had a nice conversation about just Adam's life and these themes that we see in Cyberpunk about the loss of control, kind of technology turning people into tools of oppression. And it was a great time, really fun conversation that I'm excited for. And it's going to be a great week, I think. Great episodes.
Can I just say how amazing it is that this is the first time anyone has brought up Deus Ex this whole conversation?
It's weird.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then exactly, it's it's intense how much it goes on in this genre. And then we are going to be ending out the week with a kind of a we aren't going to be able to necessarily do the time to have a discussion about necessarily the full lore of the Cyberpunk game as this week goes on, but we are going to be doing a first impressions discussion on kind of our first thoughts a day or two into this game, closer to the end of the week.
100 hours first day.
I was about to say, yeah, we don't have 2 years to cover though. Well, that's
Taking the day off.
Hey, with enough cocaine, you can get through it.
True. And I just want to take an opportunity to thank everyone on this call and then everyone who's participating on all the networks, Geek Elite Media, Lore Party, and certain POV. We've not teamed up on this scale before. I hope that we will do it again. Certain POV has been lucky enough to team up with Lore Party on many occasions, both with Extra Life this past year, guesting on episodes, having them guest on our episodes. And so I'm really excited for this crossover, and I hope we do it for more stuff because it's been a blast chatting with all of you. And clearly we have a lot to say about video games and assorted media.
I'm all
This-
out.
the-
I'm fresh
This
out.
is the Avengers level crossover here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
This is an
you've
Avengers level threat.
got the
Cyber.
you've got the music from Portals panning across all of us. And I think I don't necessarily know because we also have with Geek Elite Media is going to be releasing content about kind of Cyberpunk as a genre also this week. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily have the specific information on what their schedule is, but by all means, check them out, get a look at the cool things they're doing. They've appeared in some of our stuff this week, and it's as always, it's so cool that we're able to get all of these people together and to just talk about a genre and a game that are so relevant in ways that I think we wouldn't have even anticipated.
Since they're not here, I think that means that we get to make up what they're doing for this week. So
Yeah, we'll just tell them.
on my
Yeah.
screen, they're making cooking with prosthetic limbs in the Cyberpunk universe. The discussion on electric sheep and if they dream of androids.
I've seen this really cool video they're making of test firing smart shotguns for the first
Nice.
time.
They're,
Through
they're,
walls. I'm jealous. I really
Yeah,
am.
honestly,
and what's this?
it sounds like
They're
great
actually-
content.
They're actually doing a cyberpunk themed tabletop adaptation of A Christmas Carol.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, wonderful.
Spot on.
Finally, someone's doing that.
And Keanu Reeves is showing up.
Yeah, he's going to be a guest on with Mitch on Mitch's chat show.
What a get, man.
What a
So if it's Christmas Carol is Tupac, a hologram Tupac, the one who comes with the chains and No,
Wow.
but seriously, like when this drops, we'll obviously have links in the description for everything.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So we'll just add the asterisks of the actual things they're doing.
Read the fine print.
We'll just get one of their hosts looking at the screen going,
Exactly.
Just like get the credits to like roll through like real quick.
Yeah.
Hey, here's an actual list of the things they're doing.
Somehow we guessed one of the things.
yeah.
I won't say which one.
we'll find out which one we guessed correctly. All right, and so with that, thank you so much for being here and having this. This has been an excellent discussion and a great time. And thank you all for listening and joining us for this interesting discussion. Obviously,
Historic.
like feel free to join like any of our respective channels, like social media feeds, if you want to continue the discussion or share your own thoughts. And obviously check out our discussions this week on these individual elements within this broader genre. So we hope you'll join us, and we hope you're excited too.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for
Get out
tuning
there
in.
and cyber your punks, kids.
Word.